issues.
Okay.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having joined us in this new session. Today we have the pleasure of talking to Professor Lee Mackenzie. Professor Lee Mackenzie is a professor with a lot of international experience. He has a PhD in social justice and in education. And as I just said, Professor Lee Mackenzie is a native English speaker that have been studying, for example, issues of hegemony, oppression, and also resistance in the colonial system, with an emphasis on higher education. So, Professor, thank you very much for having joined us, and the floor is all yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you so much for inviting me to come here and talk. Okay, so I'm going to try and make this kind of participatory. I am interested in hearing what you have to say. If you don't feel comfortable speaking out, there should be a chat box. So feel free to ask questions in the chat box, and then maybe John can just keep me aware of any messages that are coming through.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. So, question for all of you. You probably can guess the answer, but what do these images represent? Don't be shy. Okay, violence. Okay, we got a few people contributing in the chat box.
Repression.
Oppression, that's the word I was trying to elicit from you. So as you can probably see, oppression comes in different forms, not always violent, but some of these images demonstrate the violent aspect of oppression more. Enslavement, yep, that's another word that could be associated with oppression. So in this session, I'm going to look at different understandings of oppression. And I'm going to compare the views of Paulo Freire and Iris Marion Young and what they have to say about oppression. And then I'm going to look at how Young's 5 faces of oppression can be used as a lens, what we call a theoretical lens, to shed light on injustices in language policy and practice. In other words, I want to show you the value of theory for understanding issues with policy and practice. And I'm interested in hearing about your own experiences of language and oppression, and we're going to try and use Young's framework to do so. That sounds intimidating, but I hope I can break it down for you. Okay. So maybe just a question to start here. What does oppression mean to you? And what are some different ways in which people can be oppressed? Again, don't be shy, please. I'm interested in hearing what you have to say. So if you have any words you want to type in the chat box. So as I said, oppression can come in different forms. What are some different ways? So for example, I'm walking down the street in Colombia. Something happens and I say, that is oppression. How would I know that that is oppression? Right, okay, good. Mariam, to minimize someone's thoughts. Could we maybe say to devalue what somebody is saying, to take away somebody's voice, for example? And you can probably see that for me, oppression means I cannot have the freedom to express myself, right? So freedom of expression then is important, and when that is constrained or limited, we can talk of oppression. Unfair and cruel treatment, yeah, so there are we can have direct oppression, slavery, which requires violence, but we can have less brutal oppression in the sense of you cannot say what you really think. And we've all been in situations where we feel like our voice does not matter. What we have to say is not important, or maybe what we are saying is being devalued. So oppression, it's important to bear in mind, understandings of oppression differ. And when we're talking about oppression, it's important that we are all clear on what we mean by oppression, especially because definitions and understandings of oppression have changed over time. And different understandings of oppression have different implications for identifying what oppression is. So if my definition of oppression is different from yours, we may not agree on what oppression is when we see it. So Eliana's saying oppression by the government in demonstrations, that's a very clear form of oppression. And often it is a more powerful entity taking advantage of a less powerful entity. But we're only going to look at Freire and Young. So this is Pablo Freire. Some of you, I hope, are familiar with your Latin American hero. You may not know this, but Freire is studied massively in the US, in the UK. He's a really big name. I don't know if it's the same in Colombia. I don't know if he has the same status. He does. Okay, you're nodding.
Yes, Professor.
All right. Okay, because I've spoken to some people and they are not so keen on Freire. Okay, so this is what Freire has to say about oppression. And engage with what he has to say. And I'd like you to think about this question. How far do you agree with his understanding of oppression? So I'll give you about 30 seconds to read, and then you can start adding comments to the chat box. So you can disagree with Freire. Remember that he was writing in 1970, which is over 50 years ago now. So things have changed in the last 50 years. So to what extent do you agree with his understanding? Does anybody want to say that they don't agree? Somebody? Ilva Janet, you don't agree?
No, excuse me. Well, I am going to answer the question.
Okay.
Well, so I completely agree with that understanding, especially with the first part, because actually for me, the oppression is like a kind of violence. And actually, violent people are not aware about what they are doing, ready? So I think for the reason that Freire is like having the like a kind of troll is gonna say something about that. So I completely agree, especially in the first part, because violent people are not aware of what they are doing.
Right. Okay. Absolutely. I think we can all agree with some of what Freire says, but let's see if we can deconstruct what he's saying here a little bit. So he's making a distinction between the oppressors and the oppressed, between the possessing class and the dominated class. So for Freire, there seems to be two groups. One of those groups oppresses the other group. And the basis of that oppression is to do with basically resources, monopolizing the wealth, monopolizing the privilege, keeping the privilege and the wealth for themselves, and justifying that wealth and privilege by saying, if you're not wealthy and privileged, it's because you're lazy, because you're incompetent. Yeah. So maybe this resonates with some of you. Just to summarize what he's saying here, I think he's saying that oppression is class-based. You have the haves and the have-nots, and the haves oppress the have-nots. It dehumanizes both partners in the relationship. It dehumanizes the oppressor and the oppressed. It's intentional. They know what they're doing when they do this. It's not an accident. They deliberately oppress. And for Freire, oppression is justified by the oppressors using the merit argument. And this is, you know, the meritocracy. And I'm sure this is quite common in Colombia, that you hear a lot of wealthy people saying, we are wealthy because we worked harder. We made it on our own, you know, not because of amiguismo or, you know, the opportunities they had that other people didn't have, or the extra money. No, we are wealthy because we worked harder. But it divides people into two groups, which suggests that if I'm from the wealthy class, then I can only be an oppressor. And if I'm from a poor class, then I can only be oppressed. I think that distinction is maybe a bit too simplistic, to have two groups, oppressor, oppressed, and to say that the oppressed are always somehow innocent. So this is Iris Marion Young. Let's just look at what she has to say. And let me just go to a comment made by John there. Yeah. I mean, it's very common. Politicians on the right are going to say, and you get this in the Republican Party in the US, you get it in the Conservative Party in the UK, and they're entitled to their opinion. They may be right to a degree, but that's the argument they come with. Okay, these people, we don't need to have too much compassion for the poor because they deserve it. They deserve the poor because, you know, they're not working hard enough. They're incompetent. Yeah. So this is Iris Marion Young, and just read through her understanding of oppression. How is this different from Freire's understanding? And how far do you agree with Iris Marion Young? So again, I'll give you about 30 seconds. So I hope you can see how Iris Marion Young has a more nuanced, a more complex understanding of oppression. And she's writing after Freire, and she's building on what Freire says. So here she says, in its traditional usage, oppression means the exercise of tyranny by a ruling group. So this is Freire's understanding. But then she goes further and says, but oppression also refers to systemic constraints on groups that are not necessarily the result of the intentions. So what she's saying here, it doesn't need to be intentional, doesn't need to be on purpose. And what she's talking about here is structural oppression, yeah, rather than the result of choices, actions, behavior, policies, yeah. And it's harder to see this kind of structural oppression, but it's there in unquestioned norms, habits, symbols, in the assumptions underlying institutional rules and the collective consequences of following those rules. So from this perspective, a university can be oppressive, a school can be oppressive, the education system can be oppressive, right? It may not mean to be, yeah, but for some people, that's the way it feels. So in this extended structural sense, oppression refers to the vast and deep injustices some groups suffer. So she does say that oppression is oppression of groups, but she's not saying there's only two groups. She's not saying there's only an oppressor and oppressed. We could have more groups that are potentially suffering oppression. So does this make more sense to you than Freire's understanding of oppression? Who do you agree with more? Maybe you just type in one word, Young or Freire. So if you agree with Young more, write Young or just Y. And if you agree with Freire more, just write F or Freire. Maybe am I speaking too fast? I don't know the level of your students because I haven't interacted with them. So I hope I'm not speaking too fast. I'm okay?
No, no, professor, it's fine. They are all the time like in touch with English, so it's fine.
Okay, well, we got Tatiana who says she prefers Freire. Okay. Oh, another one who prefers Freire. We're all going for Freire, it seems. So I guess the question for those who are choosing Freire is, do you believe in structural oppression? Do you believe, you agree with, okay, we've got somebody who agrees with Young. Oppression is structural. Okay. So there's some debate about this, and that's understandable because oppression means different things to different people, and we all have different experiences of oppression. And you don't need to take a position now. You can think later, okay, actually, I think Young has a point. Or you might say, no, actually, I'm not sure I agree with Young. But it's good to think about these things. So for Young, oppression is structural, systemic. It's embedded in practices, attitudes, and institutions. It's often unintentional or unconscious, but it can also be intentional. It refers to oppression of groups, not just classes. So it goes beyond oppression in terms of socioeconomic oppression. Because what Freire does not consider is oppression of Black people or oppression of indigenous people, yeah, or oppression of LGBTQ plus people. Yeah, so he's not considering all of those types of oppression as oppression. He's seeing it mainly in the sense of economic oppression. For Young, because she says that different groups can be oppressed. Oppression can come in many forms. It's not just economic oppression. So if we put these two side to side, you can see the differences between how they view oppression. And I'm going to give you some examples. I'll just give you one example I remember from Colombia. So my wife is Afro-Caribbean. We had a child. My wife is black. We had a child. Our daughter is white. So she went to the supermarket, Olympica, and she was pushing around, a black woman pushing around a white baby. And somebody in the supermarket said to her, "Oh, whose baby are you looking after?" Now, the person did not mean to oppress, was not intending to oppress my wife. It's unintentional, because from that person's perspective, the only situation where a black person has a white child is when they are the nanny of that child. So that's one example of oppression. And I'm sure as Colombians, when you go to the States, oh, and you say you're Colombian, all right, okay, you face oppression maybe from the border authorities, from the police, or just from people in the street when you tell them you're Colombian. The stereotypes come out, right? But I think that Young has a more sophisticated understanding of oppression. It's not a monolithic understanding of oppression. It comes in many intersecting and overlapping forms. So she avoids what we call reductionism. She doesn't reduce the argument to us against them, not just two sides. It's more complex than that. So we can talk about oppressions, not just oppression. And she talks about 5 faces of oppression. And this is important because it shows us the way that people can be oppressed in different ways. And it's a theory. So she's developed this theory based on observation, based on what she has seen. Yeah. And also it addresses the limitations of focusing only on the economic dimension of social justice. And if we have 5 faces of oppression, only one needs to be present to constitute oppression. We don't need all 5 to say this is oppression. Only one of those is sufficient. So what do you think her 5 faces of oppression are? When we talked about the images I showed you at the beginning, you came up with some words which are quite similar. Anybody want to have a guess? No worries. First one. Oh, John, you were going to say?
No, Professor. I was thinking about maybe the right of talking, where when you silence people, for example, you like ignore, for example, their perspective, knowledge, epistemologies, maybe.
So actually, I think you're going beyond Young, actually, which is important because Young, her ideas are from the 1990s. And now, as you're saying, John, we have oppression in terms of epistemological oppression, which goes beyond Young, I think. But just in terms of her 5 faces, the cultural imperialism. So she identifies this as a kind of oppression. Exploitation. So when you don't pay somebody fairly for their work, for example. Powerlessness. And maybe that also speaks to the issue of voicelessness. So I'm powerless. I don't have a voice. I'm voiceless. I have a voice. I'm empowered. Marginalization, John. Yeah, good. Marginalization is the next one. You're pushed to the side. You don't matter so much. And violence is the last one. Yeah. So I'm just going to give you examples of each of these. Yeah. And after that, I want you to think of your own examples, or how maybe something in the field of English language teaching seems a bit like oppression or seems oppressive. So in terms of cultural imperialism, Young says this involves the universalization of a dominant group's experience and culture and its establishment as the norm. I have an American friend, and I worked in Colombia, and he worked in Colombia with me. And he always used to say to me, why can't Colombia be more like the US? So this is the universalization of the dominant group's experience and its establishment as the norm. And I would always say to my American friend, what, you want massive oppression against Black people? You want 10,000 people dying of gun violence every year? You want, you know, all of these things that we have in the US. Because it's basically saying US is the model, everybody has to be like the US, and we are the dominant group and we are the norm. So it occurs when the dominant group's culture is projected as representative of all humanity, and the culture of the other comes to be viewed as deviant or deficient. You know, when you buy plasters, like sticking plasters, Band-Aids, they're usually pink, right? But I mean, the average person's skin color around the world is not pink. So it's the universalization. Okay, well, white people, we invented plasters, so we made plasters for people like us. We didn't make Band-Aids for people who aren't like us. We made Band-Aids for people like us. So it's an unconscious bias, or unconscious or unintentional. And one example of this in the field of language teaching is the spread of English. It plays an important role in the homogenization of local cultures, according to Philipson. And global English is a subspecies of cultural imperialism, what Philipson calls linguistic imperialism. So there is this narrative that if you speak English, somehow you will have better opportunities and your life will be better. And I get the argument that if you have good English, you can migrate to the States. But that doesn't mean that English is beneficial for everybody. And you will have students in your class who will say, why am I learning English? I work on a farm. I don't want to migrate. You know, so it's not beneficial for everybody, and it should not be imposed on people who don't want to learn it. I mean, I think about the UK. I think if we said everybody in higher education has to learn Spanish to B1 level, there would be a revolution. Nobody would do it. But that's what's happening in Colombia and other places around the world. You're in higher education, you need to learn English. Well, surely if you are paying for your higher education and you are an independent, agentive individual, then you should have the choice about what you spend your money on. Yeah, it could be one of the negative aspects of globalization. Yeah, I mean, it could also be from a native speaker's perspective, a positive aspect of globalization. Hi, Nancy. My gain is your loss. It benefits me, the white native English speaker, but does it benefit poor Colombian students who will never travel to the States? Or if they do, it will take them 10 years of saving to get enough money to buy the ticket. So in Europe, for example, English has become the dominant language, and it means that other languages are relegated in status. Their status is lower. English becomes the prestige language. In terms of exploitation, this is the second phase of oppression. Young says exploitation enacts a structural relation between social groups. These relations are produced and reproduced through a systematic process in which the energies of the have-nots are continuously expended to maintain and augment the power, status, and wealth of the haves. So we know that people are not paid fairly. And we know that there are a lot of companies out there making a lot of money off the hard work of employees who don't get enough money for their work. I won't mention any Colombian companies, but I can think of Amazon and how much it pays its workers in the UK, or Uber, which takes a quarter of the taxi driver's profits. That's amazing. 25% of what the taxi driver earns, Uber takes. So these are examples of exploitation. And it's basically the labor that you use, that you exert, is appropriated by other people. Yeah. And an example of this in the field of English language teaching is the brain drain and brain waste. So brain drain, you probably heard the term in Spanish, fuga de cerebro. Fuga o fuga?
Fuga de cerebros, la famosa fuga
Fuga
de
de cerebro, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So Colombia spends all this money educating Colombians, and then these Colombians leave. So the benefit of that education goes to the US or to the UK. It doesn't go to the benefit of the Colombian people. Yeah. It's a brain gain for countries like the US. So you study to become a doctor in Colombia, and then you go to the US to make your money. Colombia has paid for your education. The US benefits from your education. The same is true of people who come to the UK. And we don't just take people from Colombia. We take a lot of nurses from countries like the Philippines. But where does English come into this? Well, English plays a key role in getting the visa. You need a certain level of English to get the visa to work in these countries. And the other thing about it is that they go to the States, but then they work as a taxi driver, even though they are qualified as a lawyer. So we call this brain waste, where they are underused. Their skills are not fully used in that host society. And the fact that everybody wants to migrate to the US and the UK, one reason for that is because of English. Yeah, people could equally migrate to Brazil or to France or to Germany, but most people want to go to the US, the UK, Australia because of English. So I'm not saying anybody is to blame for this. It's just a consequence of, somebody said, this is one of the negative aspects of globalization. This could be seen as a consequence of globalization. English has become the dominant language, and countries where English is the dominant language can attract people who want to go there because English is the dominant language. So my point really is that by pushing English aggressively as the language of opportunity, we're telling students that when you have English, you're going to have these opportunities. And of course, a lot of those opportunities involve going to the US or the UK. And the British Council, many people think, oh, British Council, good organization. I like them. But they represent the interests of the UK, not the interests of Colombia. They are acting in the best interests of the UK government and UK citizens. So its aim is to improve awareness of British educational and cultural achievements overseas in order to attract international students. Here in the UK, an international student pays 5 times more than a local student. So my wife is paying 5 times more than a British person for the same education. And British Council knows that is really good for the British economy. I would say about half the universities in the UK would close without international students. It's only because of international students that we as universities can continue to exist. Powerlessness. So this is Young's explanation of powerlessness. So it's having little or no autonomy, little creativity or judgment, no technical expertise or authority, express themselves awkwardly, do not command respect. So quite similar to being silenced. I mean, if you're powerless, the implication is that you don't have a voice, right? So again, an example of this in English language teaching would be that the Proyecto Nacional Bilingüe, the Colombian English teachers were not consulted about decisions about their own professional development. So they weren't included in the process, in the project. Instead, foreign organizations and their products were recruited by the Ministry of Education and imposed on local teachers. Oh, here we have this white expert from the UK, from the British Council, and he's coming to tell you how to teach your students. And it devalues the local knowledge of local practitioners, of local Colombian teachers who know the context, understand the challenges much better than somebody from the UK, from the British Council. So 2 examples of this would be the TKT and the ICELT. So when the government said we need to promote English, they did not turn to local experts. They turned to foreign experts to help. And these foreign experts benefit because they can sell their products. They can sell TKT, they can sell ICELT or CELTA or IELTS. IELTS makes huge amounts of money for Cambridge because you have to take the IELTS until you get the right score. So you just take it again and again and again and again. Great for Cambridge English. So the British Council and Cambridge English, they are not neutral. They are not acting in the best interests of Colombia. I'm not saying they're not good at their job. They could be very good at their job. But who are they working for? In whose interests are they acting? Maybe they can be acting in the interests of both. Maybe they can be educating Colombians and also making money for themselves. But we should not close our eyes to the fact that British Council and Cambridge English are making a lot of money from Colombians, even if what they provide is a good service. So these are products which the British Council sells, and it generates millions in profits. And it reinforces this idea that Colombia needs external help. It cannot do it on its own. It needs the expertise from the global north. Otherwise, it creates a very deficit view of countries like Colombia. Colombia needs our help. Without the assistance of the US or the UK, Colombia would not be able to do this. And the other thing about this is that British Council develops its products for the global market, not for the Colombian market. So it's not only focused on, it's not contextually sensitive. It's not sensitive to the Colombian context. And marginalization. So marginalization, another face of oppression. An underclass of people permanently confined to lives of social marginality. Yeah, people who live on the margins. Yeah, and a lot of this social marginality is a result of unemployment. So if people are unemployed, they can face oppression because they're denied participation in the social life of their country. Yeah, and because they don't have a job, they don't have money. With the example of English, native foreigners, you may have heard this term, formadores nativos. The Ministry of Education wanted formadores nativos. So if you are from any country, you are a formador nativo. If I'm from Iceland or Turkey or Paraguay or Indonesia, I am a formador nativo. So what are they saying here? Why do they put the native in there? The vast majority of these formadores nativos are from Britain, Australasia, North America. And their salaries, when they come to Colombia, are equivalent to the salaries of Colombian English teachers. And they get other benefits such as health insurance, free accommodation for the first month, a domestic flight to their city of their placement, a completion bonus, and training. So they get about the same salary as Colombian teachers, but all these extra benefits. And they don't have all of the stress of marking students' work and that kind of thing. Now, this has changed, I guess, since 2017. But John, do you know what the salary is now for the starting salary for a Colombian state school teacher?
Yes, Professor. If it's, for example, a person that is like licenciado, that is a teacher that is just beginning his teaching career, it's about 2,200,000 Colombian pesos, I think. That would be like maybe like $600, maybe? Or is it that much?
Well, it depends on the exchange rate. Okay, but let's say $500 to $600. Yeah. So this is what these foreign teachers were getting paid, and they had no experience. There was no requirement for them to have any experience. There was no requirement for them to have any certification. So this surely is an example of oppression. These native foreigner volunteers, despite being required to have a degree, or they did need a degree, and at least 6 months teaching experience, they did not need a teaching qualification. And they had fewer responsibilities than local teachers. And employing foreigners marginalizes local teachers, as the local teachers are deprived of employment opportunities. Now, just imagine in the UK, we said, okay, we're going to employ loads of people from South America, and we're going to give them better conditions than our local teachers. Nobody would accept it. But in Colombia, unfortunately, people accept it. You know, we know there's high unemployment, $600, all right. We know there's high unemployment in Colombia. So if there's high unemployment in Colombia, why do you encourage people to come to Colombia to work? We have Colombians who can do this job. And the final one is violence. Now, I don't think English has ever killed anybody directly, but we can talk about epistemic violence. And this is what we do when we privilege imported knowledge over local knowledge. When we say the knowledge coming from the West, the knowledge coming from the global North is more valuable than what we have here, more valuable. So foreign expertise is more valuable than local expertise. That's a case of epistemic violence. Because surely the teacher who knows is the one who works in that context, not some external expert who doesn't understand the context. So by commissioning these organizations like British Council and Cambridge Assessment, it's devaluing and excluding local knowledge. So I wanted to have some kind of discussion or to open this up. Oh, Maria says the ones who come as native ones are paid more than Colombian ones. Right, I couldn't find these programs, these volunteer programs, they don't always make it clear what they're offering. But I could definitely see that they were paying at least the same as a Colombian teacher. So these are some questions I'd like you to think about. Most of them come from Germany. Again, why are there not Colombians now who speak a good level of English, who could work in classrooms as teaching assistants? I think it would be possible. And don't forget, you have people in countries like Trinidad and Tobago who speak English as a first language. You have San Andres and Providencia, where it's a Creole English, but they speak English. So why do we limit this to people from developed countries? Do people from developing countries speak worse English? I mean, I have a lot of Indian friends. Their English is excellent, and I love the way they speak English. Why then are we not getting other people from the global South instead of people from the global North? So think about which of these phases of oppression you have personally experienced or witnessed. And can you think of an example of each type of oppression in your own teaching or learning context? And are those oppressions intentional or unintentional? And can you think of any examples of these types of oppression related to language teaching, learning, or assessment? And in your view, which type of oppression is the most or least common in the language classroom? And how can this oppression be tackled? I'll give you one more example just to show you how widespread this oppression can be. English only English in this classroom. Is that an example of oppression? You don't need to answer that question. Have a think about it. John, is there a way that we can put students into groups?
Professor, maybe there is a way, but honestly, I don't know how to make it. So I could try, but I cannot like assure that it's going to be successful, let's say. So.
Oh, okay, I don't know. How much time do we have left?
No, it's up to you. It's fine, Professor.
Okay, let's Okay, I thought maybe it would be easy to put students into groups and then they could have more of a discussion. Well, maybe that's something you can do, John. After the class, you can continue this topic and get your students to think about examples of oppression in their own contexts. But maybe just now, if anybody has an experience of oppression that they would like to share. Nicholas?
Yeah, I think that good afternoon. I think that I have experienced different ways, like those different types of oppression in different ways. So violence, or as you mentioned before, that there are teachers that we think that because they are native, they are better teachers. That happens here in the university too. Not in the School of Languages, but with the institute that I have had teachers from Portuguese class that they are not really teachers, and we know that because we see the difference between classes. There are also, I think that it could be like a political example, but also related to education, the powerlessness. With the political one, it comes from home. Our parents are taught in the way that they have that like kind of fixed mindset that they are not able to participate in politics. Yeah, so that's the way. You like at the end we are the people, we are the ones who select the people that are going to represent us. And it would happen the same with education, like with the bilingual policies. Yeah, there are. I have read studies where I know that people are in some way going against those rules that are coming from Europe. Yeah, like the bilingualism policies. But if no one is supporting that idea, and there is only one person, is going to change or is going to become a simpleton. There is not one that is supporting that person, so there is not power in him or in that person. So I think that are those that I have experienced.
Thank you. Very articulate response, Nicholas. Very interesting to hear your perspective. Would anybody else like to contribute?
Me, maybe.
Yes, Juan Diego.
Yeah. So well, I like adding to my friend maybe. I consider that the cultural imperialism is also really present in the traditional culture here in Colombia. I come from a young married couple, but they are also like they have inside them this perspective of that English is super useful for getting money, and it is a kind of perspective that when I entered to the university and began to look for all these theories and ideas, like shocked me because it was like what they think in that way. If I am in this sorry, what they think in that way in their houses, and criticizing some ideas from the country, from to the politics. But here I'm looking different perspectives that tell me that it is not like they do it in a conscious way. They just like act in the way they grow maybe, and it is like the result of the society in which they just act, right? So this is like a kind of oppression I saw in my family and also in the society I live. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, when I was in Colombia, there seemed to be this association between English and prestige. You know, like shops, if they want to be cool, they might use an English phrase, and that somehow makes it better. And I'm wondering if you had a professional development workshop and you had the choice of a Colombian expert and a foreign expert, who do you think would get the most participants? The foreign expert, probably, yeah? Even though we don't know anything else about them other than one is local and the other is foreign. So my sense when I was in Colombia is that almost like the Colombian national psyche has this weird low self-esteem, except when la selección juega. So, okay, we have a low self-esteem. We are not good enough to do it on our own. We need these foreign experts. We need foreign investment. We need foreigners, and without the foreigners, Colombia is nothing. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you keep believing that, then it will become true. Just look at the comments that have been in the chat box. So Rolando says, I consider the cultural imperialism one of the most common types of oppression. The fact that a native speaker is always better for teaching. Well, we know this is not true. I am a teacher trainer, and I have trained hundreds of language teachers. In my experience, the best language teachers are the ones who are bilingual. Most native speakers are not bilingual. And we don't at school in the US and the UK, we don't learn about English. The average native speaker will not be able to tell you what a verb is. And language matters. You know, a Colombian teacher can explain to you in your own language how English works. And that can be very beneficial for a learner who is struggling. A native speaker can't do that. Yeah, so it's a myth that native speakers are better. And I think, you need to all advocate, and say, well, you need to challenge this. And I know it happens in universities. And the argument of universities is, well, that's what students want. Students want foreign experts. They don't value the local, they value the foreign. Yeah. So this is how oppression can come through attitudes, through social norms, through through accepted assumptions, through assumptions that aren't challenged. And then Juan Diego there says, Colombia has permeated education through neoliberalism policies. Teachers as employees that manufacture a product. Yes, absolutely. So neoliberalism, I don't know what has done more damage, cultural imperialism or linguistic imperialism or neoliberalism, probably neoliberalism, especially in my country where it was invented, along with the Americans. So apologies for that. But yeah, I think this is a global problem now, that students are only valuable if they contribute to the economy, regardless of whether that benefits them as individuals. Yeah. So, oh, Maria Teresa has put her hand up. Maria Teresa.
Yep. Regarding your questions and connecting these 5 phases of operation, I consider that all of them, as you were talking about, are represented in our Colombian language policies. Yeah, because although we have had different discussions and different authors and researchers telling us about how these phases are represented in our policies, we have a long road to walk on, because we have this idea of having native speakers as the ideal speaker, yeah, and that is something that has permeated our education, and we have those false, or I don't know, probably those policies in which if you have a native speaker in your institution, then your institution is better than the other one. And that is something that is repeated even in media. Yes, we have that international institution telling people, okay, we have native speakers, come to learn English with us. But what happens is at the end, those native speakers probably don't know many things about the current situations that the students are living or facing, which is necessary to know. And of course, totally in agreement with you, that is, we have an exploitation regarding testing as business. So we have to pay a lot of money for getting a certification, for showing other people that we have certain level of English. So we are always looking for that external authority who tells us that we are good in something, as speaking English, for instance. So most of those policies probably are not intentional. Probably they don't have this intention of favoring certain external people, external institutions as the British Council in Colombia. But that is what at the end is happening. So it is connected to that movement that started probably, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago. It is what some teachers are trying to do today, which is trying to decolonize, trying to tell the others that we have always our own epistemologies and that we should consider them as part of what our students should know. But that is not an easy road, yeah, but we have different people working on that direction. So,
But I thank you for that contribution, Maria Teresa. Absolutely, and I think new teachers can be the agents of change, and you can challenge those assumptions. You know, when a student goes, "Oh, I'd rather have the native speaker instead of this teacher," you can challenge that. You know, have those conversations with students, because I know for a fact from observing native speaker teachers and non-native speaker teachers, if I were learning a language, I'd prefer somebody who speaks my language and the language I'm learning, and who can explain to me clearly aspects of that language. I think the native speaker approach hopefully is slowly dying, but I know that a lot of businesses still, you know, put it on their publicity and think, okay, this is how I attract clients. Yeah, unfortunately. Okay, do we have any other contributions before we bring this to a close?
Yes, Professor. There is one comment by Karen Niño, and she says, in my experience, she comments that she has noticed that many like students from other like degrees programs have to study English, but she doesn't see that, for example, indigenous languages are tough at the university, so it's one of the like structural, let's say, like failures she notices, and that is the comment she makes in the chatbot.
And I think, considering the journey that Colombia is on, the peace process, why learn a language that allows people to migrate, that allows people to leave, and not learn a language which helps people in that country understand each other better? You know, like if people were all learning each other's languages, I think there would be more empathy and understanding among Colombians and the different ethnic groups in Colombia, you know, rather than, okay, we all need to learn the language of the new colonial power in the world, which in this case is American. Yeah, so absolutely, I think, and I think again, you are the agents of change in your respective classrooms. These are the debates that you can have. These are the conversations that you can have with students. These are the topics that you can discuss. And you can challenge, you know, I used to challenge my students, why do you want to go to the US? Oh, I want to make a better life for myself. I said, well, what about your own country? What about your family? Don't you want to make a better life in Colombia? And I don't know why that is. I mean, maybe it would be different if they came back after the States, but most of them, they go to the States and they stay, or they go to the UK and they stay. Anyway, I hope I have made you think about this issue a little bit, and about I will share my slideshow with John. So if John wants, he can do these activities with you. It's just some scenarios, and then you have to decide who is being oppressed in this situation. Yeah. So I'll share that with John, and might be interesting for you to discuss this issue further. And then at the end, these are my 3 publications if you want to read them. If you can't access them, let me know. I can email them to John and you can have them for free. You don't need to pay for them. The one that I've been talking about the most has been this one, the critical evaluation of the social justice implications of the Colombian government's policies. But I also looked at discrimination in job ads. So the job ads on Facebook advertising for native speakers, I analyzed those, and clearly there's discrimination. And then the last one is about English and development. So those are some extra sources that you might want to look at. And just to finish, how useful is it, do you think, to think about injustices related to language teaching? Do you think it's useful? A thumbs up or a thumbs down, however you want to communicate that to me. Nicholas, thank you. Thank you, Harold.
Professor, I think that is very important, especially because now we can talk about English as a lingua franca, no? And that is one of the issues that we try to tackle in the classes with the students, because I think it's very important for people to know that English is used differently everywhere, and it's been appropriated by the people, let's say. So it's kind of interesting to think about these issues, no? Because it's changing the panorama, let's say, the landscape of English.
Absolutely, and I think that's a good thing. You know, I think the fact that English does not belong to the English is a good thing, because it can be co-opted and it can be used. And we've seen slaves using English to communicate with each other. It's not their language, but it's the only way they can communicate. So it can be a lingua franca, it can be neutral, and it can be used to speak back to power. And Freire talks about how it's important for the oppressed to know the language of the oppressor. You need to be able to speak back to power, and that obviously involves learning the language of power. But because English is so versatile, it can be co-opted, and we've seen this all around the world. So I think there is hope in this English as a lingua franca, and basically saying, no, ownership of English does not rest with the English. It does not rest with the Americans. Yeah, it's a universal global language. All right, thank you. Rolando has just put there, to avoid oppression, we have to ensure and defend our identity. Yeah, absolutely.
Is there maybe any other comment, or you can just jump in, use the microphone, so it's fine if there is another one.
Interestingly, I think for a lot of Colombians who learn English, it becomes part of their identity. You know, I'm sure you feel it's part of who you are, John, that you speak English.
Yes, Professor,
Yeah.
it's true.
And there's nothing wrong with that, and why not embrace that? But it doesn't mean that, you know, you are oppressed necessarily. You're using a tool. Language is a tool, and that tool allows you to do things you couldn't do without it.
Yes, I totally agree. And Professor, we really appreciate the fact that you were here talking to us, because it was really interesting, because you are a native English speaker and you began to analyze all these issues, all these hegemonic forces. So it's very interesting, and it was very enriching, because it's something that doesn't happen that often, let's say. So it was very enriching to listen to you, Professor Mackenzie.
Well, the reason for that is my wife is Colombian and she's an English teacher.
Ah, I see.
And she's a better teacher than I am.
Mm-hmm.
But whenever we apply for jobs around the world, they say, "Oh, we don't want your wife. We only want you."
Mm.
And I got sick and tired of trying to explain to people, look, she's a better teacher than me. So I decided to research it. So that's an inspiration for all of you. If you find an injustice that really makes you passionate, research it, publish, spread the word.
Professor, thank you very much. And with that last comment, I think we can close. And it's a very powerful message because sometimes we are also taught that, for example, publishing is kind of like neoliberal, hegemonic, but I think that is not possible to find, for example, without publishing, because with publishing, you can have like a voice and let, for example, other people know your perspective and your position. So it's also positive in that regard, no?
Yeah, I mean, I share your concerns about publishing, but I mean, you know, you don't necessarily have to publish in academic journals. Poems, songs, images, photos, whatever is going to get the message across, I think. But I think researching it really helps you understand the issue yourself, and it gives an outlet for your negative emotions. So instead of being angry, you can channel that anger into something useful.
I'm sorry, and there is another situation, John, with publications, is that they are in a sense also a means of oppression, because they don't accept everything that you want to publish. You need to follow certain criteria, and if you don't follow the criteria, they don't publish you.
And I have faced this here. You know, in the UK, they're like, okay, but you only publish on Colombia, so that's not real research. You know, so there are levels of oppression, and unfortunately, sometimes you got to play the game. You know, Freire would say you got to learn the language of the oppressor. You know, to be able to speak back to them. And in a way, it's kind of the same with academia. It's like if you don't play the game, then nobody will hear what you have to say.
Yes, it's also true. Professor, thank you so much for everything, for this very enriching talk, for your perspective, for everything, for your experiences in general, because they were truly enriching. Thank you so much for having joined us today in this session.
Thank you for the time. All my love to Colombia, and take care. And I hope it was